These flavors are overwhelming and they don't make any sense together. The only thing they have in common is being really expensive. It's like the culinary equivalent of Donald Trump's apartment. But Andrew and Steven sit there with New York's financial district for a backdrop, and they try to pretend that the pizza doesn't taste like golden shit.
I'm honestly speechless. I feel weird.
Is it the gold?
I just paid $250. I feel kind of like I'm committing a crime.
And that's what $1,250 looks like.
There's this kind of sadness that sets in as they realize that the $2,000 pizza isn't worth it at all.
If you are not willing to spend something, if you feel that from your subjective value that it's way too expensive for what it's worth, then of course you're not going to spend that money on doing so. Quite convenient that, because no one would want to pay $15 an hour for someone flipping burgers at McDonald's, which pretty much proves your own point that the minimum wage doesn't work. Well, it's the same principle that if someone charges $2,000 for a pizza, your value of that pizza, isn't worth spending $2,000 on, so you're not going to waste your money in doing so. That was your own subjective value. But somewhere out there will be people who, for whatever reason being, do value that. So they will go out and spend it, and that's their own personal choice. And see, if nobody is buying it, then of course the company's not going to make the money. So the company would be forced to give up selling $2,000 pizzas. We live under corporatism, so there's less choice. If this was to be a capitalist system, if it was to be a free market, there'd be strong and fierce competition. And you could bet your bottom dollar that at the end of the day, the consumer has so many other options out there. So I don't see what the problem is here. The fact that you have a choice to go out and spend money on a pizza that you do value for less money, then that's all there is to it. You've got that choice. If you like shiny things, there's actually things that are cheaper that you can get for, better value.
And they start to feel almost like they've done something immoral. It's a feeling I've had many times myself after spending too much money on some gilded piece of trash in a vain attempt to fill the hollow in my soul. Is there a name for that feeling? Well, I like to call it fucking neoliberalism.
And that is exactly what I was talking about, that really it's all down to your own personal problem. And what you're trying to do is project that off onto other people. See if you're feeling unhappy and how you try to rectify your problem of feeling unhappy by spending money. I'm afraid that's your own problem. That's your own irresponsibility. If you're feeling unhappy about something, it's your own choice over what you do in order to better your life personally. You can't, blame other people for that. You can't blame capitalism for the sake of people producing things that make people's lives better just because you're feeling unhappy. No one stuck a gun to your head and said, buy this. And this, again, is just classic socialist mentality. Because all I ever see from socialists is pushing the blame off onto other people. They done it with that of the United States when they blamed the United States for the fault of Venezuela's problems. They did it to the United States when it came to that of Chile's own economic problems. And it's just a continuation. It's always a case that it's always someone else's fault. It's never their own fault.
To fully understand why a $2,000 pizza is not worth it, you have to understand it in the context of capitalism. The price, $2,000, tells you the exchange value of the pizza, and if you live in America, you have an instinctive sense for what that means, because you know all the other things you could buy with $2,000.
ContraPoints ignores the fact that not everybody has the same wage bracket and not everybody holds the same wealth. Now, I understand that yes, there are people who earn more wages. Now, this all goes down to this irrational argument as if to say that this is a problem and that everybody should get paid equally the same. To do so would completely destroy the incentive for people to better themselves. The universal basic income was a disastrous failure in Finland, where it was supposed to work. Because when people, work with less effort and still get the same as the people who work with more effort, you end up destroying the incentive for people to work harder.
For a lot of people, $2,000 would buy a few months of food or healthcare or golden nails. And there's a lot of families who sit around the kitchen table every evening worrying about how they're going to afford golden nails. And it's that awareness that makes the shitty $2,000 pizza seem not just aesthetically disappointing, but almost obscene or even immoral. But of course, to call it immoral is actually to misidentify the real problem. So it's not like those shitty YouTube comments that go, "Pizzas in Africa could have eaten those children, how dare you?"
It is not the fault of American people buying pizzas, even if it's a $2,000 pizza. It's not their fault for why African people are living in starvation.
Because the problem isn't that Andrew, Adam, and Steven are bad people for buying an expensive flatbread smeared with gilded cream cheese. The problem is our economy fundamentally operates in a way that makes inevitable these repulsive juxtapositions of scarcity and abundance.
Price is determined through the laws of supply and demand. It's just a simple fact of the matter that if there's a scarcity of something and you've got a far greater demand for it, the cost drives up. It's the same thing that if you've got a large abundance of something, you've got a lower demand for it because there's more of it to go around, therefore there's a lower cost. And in the real world, things like gold and silver are scarce, like all resources. Resources are not infinite. This is the problem with the Marxist view of things. They seem to think that resources are just infinite, that you've got enough to just go around everyone. That is a misunderstanding of the definition of scarcity. The definition of scarcity means that people's expectations exceeds what is actually available to them. Now that's part and parcel of human nature. You're not going to change that. And this is the problem again with Marxists. They want to change mankind. And the last time that you tried to change mankind through creating the new man, you led more than 5 million people to their deathbed. Just cite that of Vladimir Lenin between 1921 and 22, where he starved 5 million people to their deathbed, or up to about 10 million. And the purpose of the study of economics is that because resources are scarce, you need to find some way of allocating those valuable scarce resources to commodities to provide for the market whilst using the fewest resources as possible. Therefore, minimising as much waste as you possibly can. Since resources are finite and not infinite, then what are you going to do when you destroy the information of prices through socialist government price controls? And once you've done that, how then do you know how much to produce? You don't. And how then do you know what resources to use or where to allocate the scarce natural resources? You don't know any of that information. That is the economic calculation problem. And this is the laughable part, because how convenient of socialists to then say and critique capitalism by saying, oh, we can't allow a free market, or we can't allow, the capitalist system to just regulate itself because the evil capitalists will use up all the world's resources and we'd be left with nothing. That basically is one of the socialist arguments, and that argument contradicts the entire argument there. Because that is basically conceding and admitting that yes, there is scarcity and there is a reason to care for the world's resources, and it's an acknowledgement to say, okay, we acknowledge the fact that resources are finite, and we acknowledge the fact that you cannot afford just to use up all the world's resources. So you can see the inherent contradiction by socialists on one hand admitting that, but then coming out like ContraPoints has just there, with this idea that they can just ignore the laws of supply and demand. It's wholly irrational. If you ignore the laws of supply and demand, then please tell me, why is gold and silver more valuable than a rock that you can find in your garden? Now, common sense would tell you that. Common sense would give you the answer to that. But it seems to be these people don't have any common sense whatsoever, right? They have none. If the rock was that of the same value to that of gold and silver, then it would be there in demand. But it's not. Because at the end of the day, people have a very, very large abundance of it. It costs nothing to have the rocks. Unless it's some special type of rock. A rock that's got some sort of history behind it or whatever being. You get the point.